So hello, everybody. We are very happy to be here today with Benjamin Snuffy Wright, um, glass artist, multimedia artist, scientist, artistic director at Pilchuck Glass School, and artist in our show coming up called Glow, featuring a bunch of artists working with light and other media. Ben, we're thrilled to have you for a few minutes to learn more about your work and process and ideas and inspirations. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Maybe you can share a bit about your background and.
Sure. Background, I guess, becomes a longer and longer story as we age into middle age here. But yeah, as you referenced, I do have a science background. Sort of grew up always into art, but never really was surrounded by scientists. Both my parents are scientists to certain degrees, as are the rest of my brothers and stuff, and not a lot of artists in the mix. And so wasn't until I had already finished an evolutionary biology degree that I sort of realized that maybe my true calling was to make things. I would say that sort of understanding of the world of like humans' involvement in systems and sort of partial understanding of the ecosystems that we inhabit is sort of central to my art making as well. So in a lot of ways, kind of searching for the same truths, just kind of using different tools. And in terms of my creative practice, it is a spectrum of activity. I love to make things. I would probably self-define as a maker above all things. But if you look at how I actually spend my time, I'm also an educator and a curator and an administrator as well, creating programs to educate future artists. So I really see that all as a spectrum, and the balance sort of shifts from day to day and week to week and year to year, but that's sort of what I do on a day-to-day basis.
You use glass in your work and you used multimedia in your work, and there's just so much jam-packed into it. I'd love to hear you more.
I'm definitely an opportunistic person in terms of materials, what's at hand. What's in the waste stream increasingly is of interest to me. What do other people not value? And how can that be put to artistic use? In terms of glass, I've often sort of referred to myself and the community, which is very much my family. I'm sort of like a non-observant Jew or Catholic in terms of like I'm culturally quite glass. I've made my career within the spectrum, but it is one of many materials that I do use. That being said, it's one that continues to engage me, and I'm the scientist in me is really into the problem solving aspect of the material, how much is known after thousands of years of working with it, but that it can still surprise on a daily basis. So I think because I went to the Appalachian Center for Craft after getting that biology degree and really delved deeply into sort of a material understanding, I think that it's one of, as opposed to like, I'm very interested in quilting, but like wrapping my head around how to approach textiles is brand new in a certain way. That's exciting, but also I have this whole vocabulary with glass that I can kind of fall back on. It's very much like drawing. Everybody sort of knows how they draw, yeah, and that's after 20 something years of working with the material, which if somebody had told me it took that long to get comfortable with a certain material, I might have stuck to one. But no, I think a lot of the interest in making for me is continually, up on campus here, we're surrounded by these new sort of machine aided ways of making, which is really new and interesting to me. I haven't really I'm just sort of beginning to chew around what I might use a laser cutter for, and where that sort of intersects with my hand in interesting ways, and where I don't like it. And so I think that's a lot of makers, I think, are, even if, I think if you talk to painters about what they do, even in that one material, they're sort of constantly problem solving throughout their career, or they're very bored and dissatisfied. Those are sort of the options.
Yeah, I do think that that's the strength of the arts and artists in general, is we become problem solvers. And it's like a constant research path. And I definitely see that in the work that you're doing. You're exploring ideas and expressing yourself, with the objects that you're appropriating and or making, and both together, to share what you're thinking about. So I see lots of cast off objects, and is it fake foliage in the recent piece?
Yeah, I really like to mix the sort of like actual natural objects with sort of human approximations of those objects, or really poor human approximations of those objects, or how little information we need to give to, say, palm tree, for example, and how all that conveys. So yeah, I'm interested. My partner introduced me recently to a term called ad hocism, and I was sort of aware of the adjective ad hoc, but really sort of, as she was reading sort of a definition, really sort of defines my approach. It's an immediacy. What can I get my hands on to express? And as much as possible, getting out of the sort of like conscious brain of expression, and trying to tap, if you're sort of immediate enough with your materials, that maybe you might tap into something that doesn't get weighed down always in sort of material decision making, and decisions that take 3 or 4 days, because that can really kill my momentum in the studio.
Would you call it a kind of stream of consciousness process that you?
At its best, yes. And I mean, I think often people assume that means that you're just making random associations, or just, which, depending on how you understand the word random, is exactly what you're doing. But it's actually an attempt to access parts of your brain that you're not processing consciously. So it's just as active a mental process as as some very deliberate act. It's just sort of trying to tap into a different wavelength. And I think a lot of that, again, it's sort of like the waste material of your brain, right? I think that's where a lot of the interesting stuff is going on that you're not ready to deal with. There's a lot of, I think when I look at my work, and it's really not necessary that an audience sort of activates on all these levels, but there's always a sort of most superficial level where I'm talking about an idea, whether I know it at the time of making or not. There's a lot of recent work deals with ideas of migration and invasive species, and how we sort of apply those ideas to different species, to different groups of humans, that kind of thing. So that's sort of like an ideal level. But then there's if the work is really working, there's like a much more personal level of whatever's going on in my life as well, that sort of percolates through the work. But I think it's not really autobiographical or in any way, or important that audiences make that connection to me. I just think it inherently makes the work more approachable, if it has that human aspect to it, if it's not all sort of clinically about an idea. I mean, there's a reason I'm an artist and not a scientist.
Are you surprised by what people see in your work, or the responses they have to it ever? Does anything kind of?
Constantly, I'm surprised by what I see in my work. To quite, like, if my work is really working, if I'm able to get into that state when I'm making the work, then there's this like bizarre dissociative experience when the work is like up on the wall and you're like, even though you were with it every step of the way, it's sort of like, oh, weird, I made that. And then you start seeing things in it as well. That's a whole nother layer of understanding. I really don't like, and when I teach, try to do my best to dispel the notion that there's like one way of making idea into object. There's this very like simplified, it's sort of like how we explain evolution to people. It's not at all the way it works, and people explain art as an artist has this idea and then they make this thing to convey an idea to the audience. And for me, it's a much more holistic back and forth where like you have a germ of an idea that starts an object and then that object informs that idea. And then for my work, I really primarily work in installation format. So it's sort of an immersive experience. And then you surround the audience with different elements that are then associating with each other so that you get a very intentional sort of hypersensory experience where you're not taking in all of the idea or all of the idea at once, or there's sort of infinite sort of kaleidoscope possibilities with the ideas in the room. It doesn't mean that I really convey messages in a didactic way, or like, when I'm talking about the environment, there's not a underlying policy goal, but it hopefully allows people to start thinking about things that they're either not conscious of or like actively pushing down into the subconscious, which we're all doing on a level in terms of our relationship with the planet. I mean, I think that's been pretty well illustrated.
Yeah. I've had a number of artists talk about making work in partnership with the work, like it's this independent entity that they're collaborating with. And I think it's an interesting viewpoint and really true because it is like a conversation with the material and the activity that you go through.
Yeah, and I just present that as a counter argument to the statement that there's one way to make art. I mean, there certainly are people that have an idea, sketch it in their sketchbook, and then go into the hot shop and execute that idea. And that's the closed loop for them. And that's a wonderful way of making. I just think the idea that there's, this sort of like light bulb moment or divine, inspiration, whatever you've called it throughout the years is, I'm sure it happens to people. And for me, it's a much more like work thing, like work with the work and partnership. I definitely try and have a lot of different work going on in my studio at once. So all 5 of these pieces that will be in the show were basically developed sort of overlapping or simultaneously. So there's a lot of influence, again, not intentional, but a lot of influence both visually and sort of thematically between the 5 pieces. So
are you having much time to teach lately, or has that been less prevalent in your daily life in your more administrative role at Pilchuck?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of different things I engage in, and the balance always sort of shifts, and sometimes it shifts on a daily or weekly, and then sometimes seasonally or even, and I would say that teaching in terms of workshops and that kind of thing has definitely decreased. I mean, being responsible for running an education program or not running an education program in the last couple of years, which actually strangely requires more administrative work than running the program. But I think it's just a super intense use of energy. So to take a break from that, essentially to go, when I teach workshops, I really try and be 100% present for that experience. I'm very aware that it's, the people that are taking the class have sacrificed quite a bit to be there and have that experience. So I've taken a little break from workshop teaching. That being said, my role on campus is very, I wear a lot of hats here, but I do a lot of studio visits. Our emerging artists in residence are just finishing up here. So meeting with them directly, making sure we bring in other curators to see what they're up to is a big part of my concept of the program, of that program. So there is a fair amount of teaching work, I guess, and giving feedback, and I still do visiting artists lectures and studio visits is something I really enjoy doing. So it's still part of the balance, but it's certainly, I was teaching at the university level really intensively for a couple of years, and it hasn't been as much a part of the mix since I started at Urban Glass about 9 years ago. I was there for about 5 years and then came out here. So.
Yeah, and you came to Pilchuck really not that long before COVID hit, right?
Yeah, so spring of 2019, I had the pleasure of sort of running my predecessor Tina Alfiero's last summer of programming. I sort of started right before that. And then, I made a program for 2020, which of course we canceled. This last summer, we had a series of wonderful residencies, but we tried to keep the sort of campus population much smaller and more local. And plans as of now are for a full summer next summer, and I'm pretty optimistic that we've learned enough to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, fingers crossed for all of us that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that want to get back to Pilchuck, and we certainly want to have them back.
Yeah. Yeah, I was reading about a great program you guys did with local Indigenous artists.
Mm-hmm.
That was very cool.
Yeah, that's been a focus for a while of the school. Certainly Preston, but also Joe David is an artist who Preston will be teaching with this spring, who has a long connection with the school. And then also through our Artists in Residence program, not only in the Pacific Northwest, not only locally, but there's been just an exceptional group of Indigenous artists who have come through that program. And that's really designed to introduce interesting artists out in the field who aren't working in glass or who have not had experience with glass. So it sort of teams them up with a group of glass fabricators here on campus. So that's an amazing way to sort of introduce new artists to glass who are already, fairly well along in their career and they have developed their process. So it's always interesting to see how that group of artists sort of what they gravitate towards with the material. Prior to being the artistic director, one of my favorite jobs here was that we have an artist assistant position that works directly with those artists in residence and sort of helps translate their ideas into glass. And that really appealed to my problem solving, sort of interests, I guess.
Yeah, Pilchuck is such an amazing place, and it's the 50th anniversary year, and it's, I just want to bow down to the the great, Godhead that is Pilchuck.
Well, it's so fun. I mean, I've had conversations with Dale, and he had, it's just a reminder to like chase crazy dreams. He had no concept of this thing lasting 50 years and growing into what maybe dreams, but not even really. I don't think the initial instinct was just to make something really amazing happen on a very small scale. And it grew its own momentum. So if there's a lesson to be learned there, it's, amazing things come from modest beginnings, and you just got to get out there, and if you have a vision, you got to do it.
Yeah, that's a good lesson, an important lesson. Is there anything else that comes to mind that you'd want to share with folks about your work or concepts of light or?
I haven't really talked about neon at all. All of these works do feature neon, so it's interesting timing to be invited to a light show, because I've always been fascinated with neon and used it periodically throughout my work, found neon signs. Prior to this body of work, I was really, and in a few of these pieces too, mostly interested in the light quality that I could get out of neon. So both color, I mean, I'm a maximalist at heart, so the sort of like color density and like sort of intensity that I could get and fill an installation with out of neon was really fascinating. But it was never really an element that you were meant to focus on, the actual neon. And in this work, started trying to tackle presenting the neon as a visual element of the piece, the actual piece of neon. And some of the neon I fabricated. Tyler Gordon, who's our studio manager up here, has also made some neon for me. This mushroom back here was made by Jen Ellick and Chris Stenzel for me. And then there's a neon ring in there. So starting to play, I've also got these sort of nesting acorn shapes that I worked with Dante Marioni and Yoshi Sego on this last summer. So starting to think about how neon can play with blown glass and sort of more three-dimensional shapes as well, which is totally new for me. So it's an exciting part of the practice. It's, really one of the benefits of working at a place like this. Yes, the facilities to investigate these kind of things, laser cutters, but also the technical know-how that we have on our staff, but also that comes through here is just amazing in a given year. Even a quieter year like this last year, we had an amazing group of residents up here. So I would say our program's up for next year. We just released our Emerging Artists in Residence applications, which are due January 15th. Application for everything else is in February, and we're really looking forward. We have about 100 super faithful students who signed up in 2019 to come in 2020, and they're still rolling over their admission and keeping their fingers crossed for next year. So it's going to be a great year, and hope everybody can join us.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for talking to us and
it's my pleasure
sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to the show and having all this work together, and just kind of the unexpected conversations that happen between the pieces. It's always
it's going to be great. I was just talking to Becky Feather, and I'm a huge fan of her work, and Jen, of course.
Me too.
Megan, I mean, it's an honor to show with that crew.
Be sure not to miss Glow. The exhibition features 7 regional artists at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts from December 3rd through January 30th.